Hello and welcome everybody to the third episode of The Diary of an Autism Mum. Today's episode is all about, really about what the signs were when we thought Sienna might have autism. So those questions we asked ourselves, is this autism? Or why is Sienna presenting a little bit different to her peers? And I guess that's where our journey really started, when we noticed that Sienna was a little bit different to other children. So I would like to say thank you for joining me on the third episode and really just give you a bit of an update on how things are going so far. This episode really is quite important to me, and if I'm honest, I have probably procrastinated it a little bit just because it was right at the early stages, and it's meant that I've had to revisit some of the real hardcore feelings of what we were going through at the time. And it was really quite an intense feeling and a lot of uncertainty, a lot of questions, and just really a lot of anxiety. So I guess I found revisiting it a bit triggering, and what I realised is that I actually kept some things back. I think I've blocked a lot of the emotions, perhaps some of the experiences we went through, just because they were really quite scary at the time, and some of the things I realised I couldn't actually remember. So I'm going to really try and go back to that time. So Sienna would have been around 18 months. When we sort of initially noticed some differences. And what I'm going to try and do is just kind of share what we were going through and why we thought this might be autism. It's a really important episode to share with you, which is why I've kind of made myself do it, because lots of parents will feel overwhelmed. You feel quite lost and nobody else really knows what you're going through. So it's really quite challenging. And so I really wanted to share this journey just because if there are people going through what we experience, which there will be, I want them to realise that what they're going through, those feelings, those emotions that they're experiencing are completely common with other parents in that situation, and the conversations you have with yourself, the conversations you have with your family, your partner, and then all the kind of professionals, it's really overwhelming and you're just not really sure about anything at that time. So I know that this is a really important topic, and it was something that, although difficult, I've pushed myself to make sure I record this episode. It's quite a tough time for all of the family that are involved. What I would like to say is thank you to everybody that has listened to the first two episodes, and hopefully it's given you a good flavour for what's to come in this podcast series. And if you do like what you're listening to and it's giving you some things to think about, it's giving you awareness, it's giving you a bit of comfort, if you're somebody that's going on this journey as well and you don't feel alone, then please do keep listening, follow this series, give it a like and share it with anybody that you think might find it useful. So without further ado, we will dive right into today's episode. So just start really in this first part of the podcast, just talking about what were the early signs, what were the things that we started to notice that were a little bit different to our other experiences with children, or children that we knew of. Sienna was our first child, our only child. But when she was sort of in those first early months, I used to take her to baby groups. And although I wasn't around many other children, because I was probably one of the first out of my friends to have a child, there were things that we noticed. Some of the things that I initially noticed, like solitary play. Sienna would kind of prefer to play on her own and wasn't really bothered around other children. Now, she didn't necessarily avoid other children, but she just wasn't really aware of them. It wasn't actually that apparent until she started her nursery, where it was more obvious that she wasn't mixing with other children. And then one of the biggest telltale signs, I say, was speech. So as you know, Sienna is non-verbal, so she does not talk, she does not communicate through using verbal language. She communicates with us through an iPad which has an app on it, and she uses words on the app to communicate. Initially, when Sienna was first born, she progressed typically in terms of communication like any other child her age, and I would say she got up to about 18, 20 words in that first sort of 18 months. So with the typical one word language, such as mom, dad, ta, no, all the kind of short words that you start saying when you're a young sort of baby. And even it got to things like other grandparents. So she said granddad, nanny, please. And so there was some language in those early sort of 12 months to 18 months. And then what we noticed was that language regressed. So slowly, the words that she could say stopped being said. And so although there was sounds, lots of sounds, and she still makes sounds today, there was no words that were coming out. And this was something that you don't really notice at first. But then you're suddenly thinking, she hasn't said daddy for a long time, or she hasn't said mummy for a long time. And then you kind of think you're just imagining it, but you're not. And then family members started to pick up on these things and be like, does she not say that word anymore? So that was probably the biggest telltale sign. And then one of the other biggest signs that we noticed was her eye contact. So when you would play with Sienna or you would do anything, bath her, feed her, and so on, she wouldn't actually look at you. She would sort of look away from you, or she'd just off centre. So she's never really kind of looking. And then when we started to get worried about this, I started to notice she wasn't responding to her name. So you would call her, you would say Sienna, Sienna, and there would be no movement, there would be no response to her name being called. And then you start to think, well, maybe she's got a hearing problem. And actually that is one of the things that they make you test for before you go down sort of autism testing. So eye contact, regression of speech, solitary play, and not responding to her name being called. I would say these were the main signs that we noticed. And then as you start to see these things happening more and more, you start to watch other things. And then I would notice little things with the way she played, the types of play that she was doing. She would always go for the same toys. And I could give her new things to play with. I'd buy her new things, and it was always like a particular thing that she would play with. And I can't even remember, I can picture it, but it was one where you push the button and then it flips up. And I remember she just kind of really wanted to play with this and nothing really else. She would just sort of amuse herself with the one toy, and everything else was not really of interest to her. And this was the same this was mirrored in her nursery setting as well. And then things like we would take her to like baby groups, we would take her swimming and like baby gymnastics, and again she just didn't seem to be like all the other children that were in these groups. Initially at swimming, everything was great and she was kind of on a par with her peers and didn't sort of appear any different or to be behaving any differently. But as she got older, and we started to move up the groups, we just noticed, she wasn't engaging in the swimming. She wasn't listening to the instructions. All the other sort of babies that were there would respond to the instructions given by parents, but Sienna just didn't seem to have that level of response. And again, you question, is this a hearing problem? Is she just defiant? Does she just not like water or swimming? But then we saw it in different settings, different baby groups, and we took her to like a massage group and all these other things, and I just started to notice that things were looking a little bit different. And I sort of thought maybe it's me, maybe it's because I'm not integrating myself into the group, maybe I'm not doing enough, and that's why Sienna's not doing it, and Sienna's not as active or enjoying the baby mom groups as much as the other children. So eventually I just stopped going because it became more and more challenging, and you start to see these little things where your child looks different to other children, and if you don't go, then you don't see it. And so in a way, I think I was protecting myself because I thought, well, if we don't go, I don't see any differences between Sienna and the other children. So that is something that happened kind of early on. And as a young mom and not really having other sort of young mom friends, this was quite difficult because I didn't really talk about it with anybody. I certainly didn't want to worry my husband and or family or act like one of those moms that's just been a bit neurotic because she's not as advanced as other children. So all these sort of things are going on. You're starting to notice differences with your child and other children. And then you've got the differences like speech regression, not responding to the name, playing differently, making sounds rather than saying words. And then there was this sort of solitary play, as I say, so preferring to just sort of be on her own. And if children came over, she was just not really responsive to that. In fact, it was like they were invisible, which was difficult. Just these social differences that were occurring at this time. And as I say, this was probably from about age 1 up to about 18 months, this kind of 6-month period, you really started to notice things that were really big clues, but things that you didn't really want to jump to conclusions because, she could have just been a slow developer and you obviously don't want to compare your child to other children. So you kind of leave things a little bit unsaid, undone, and you just wait a little bit. So whilst I don't think we really missed any signs, I think we were waiting to see if these things that were happening at the time developed or changed in any way. So we kind of gave it time to manifest and see how they presented a bit later. And every child is different. So some children do prefer to play a bit differently and lining things up, but the kind of obvious autism signs, some were obvious, some weren't, and you have to give it time to see if it is just the way your child likes to play or if it is something that needs to be explored and investigated through a diagnosis. So once we got to the point where we realised these clues, these signs, this typical way Sienna was behaving and presenting herself, we knew there came a time where we needed to explore getting her diagnosed. What actually led us to getting Sienna diagnosed I remember it really vividly. It was a conversation I'd had with my mum. So although there was these things going on in the background, which we were aware of, but at that point we weren't necessarily thinking autism. We were just thinking things were a bit different. And I remember coming to my mum's house because she had collected Sienna from nursery this particular day. And when I came in to come and see Sienna, my mum said, I think you need to get some help with Sienna. And I was, a bit confused. And she said, you need to speak to somebody about how she is because there's something not right. There's something different about her. And obviously I'd just finished work. I'd come to pick her up. And she said, you need to get on to your health visitor and you need to book an appointment because Sienna's different and she's young enough now, old enough now, I guess, that you can explore what's going on because there's something different with Sienna. Yeah, this was a really hard conversation because it kind of came out the blue, but it wasn't a surprise, if that makes sense. And my mum is not one for softening the blow or she does not wrap things, does not mince her words. In a way, it was probably quite good that she did that. Because she kind of said it in a way that made me scared. And, and then it all kind of made sense. And I guess that day she'd gone to pick up Sienna from nursery and they had maybe picked up some things and said to my mum, oh, we've noticed this about Sienna. We're not sure if Betsy's aware of it, which, looking back, I was probably quite offended that they didn't tell me that directly. But, sometimes these conversations are a bit difficult. But I am actually grateful that they did say something to somebody. And my mum was probably the best person for them to have said it to because she will be direct. And I think at that time I needed somebody to be direct with me. And so that not that I was burying my head in the sand, but just so that I took action. And, from that moment I did take action and I booked in an appointment with the health visitor initially. And then we got a referral to speak to the GP. And so that was kind of the start of a very long process in terms of going down the path of getting a diagnosis. Now, I could say it happened overnight, but that would be a huge lie. It took over a year to kind of get this process going. In fact, she was over 3 when she got diagnosed. We had many difficulties at this time. For one, our doctors was under one locality, but we lived in a different locality, so it was difficult because the services in these 2 areas were different, but we didn't want to come out of the process of going down the diagnosis, so we stuck with our doctors. But there were certain services in one area that weren't offered in the other, so doctors didn't speak to each other because they were from different localities, so it became really difficult. We had a number of appointments at various health centres that we had to go and speak to. We had to get the nursery involved, who were fantastic, and this was a unique case for them. They had not gone through this process either, but they were able to really support us in terms of getting Sienna referred. We did have to go through things like speech and language therapy, and we had hearing tests that Sienna had to attend to rule things out. The speech and language therapy, I have to say, I felt was a bit of a waste of time, but at the time I can see it was a process they needed to go through, so we had somebody visit the house. But the appointments, you have like 3 appointments, but they are so spaced out because of the availability and because it's such a resource that's so understaffed and the need is so high. So yeah, you'd see a speech and language therapist and it would be like 2-3 months later before you got your next appointment to update them on what was happening and so on. You had to go to a number of appointments with a paediatrician who's a specialist, and once they'd had so many appointments with you, they would then refer you to this assessment with a multidisciplinary team, so a team of experts from educators to education psychologists, autism specialists, teachers, doctors, and so on. And you have to go to these sessions where your child is observed and in a group, so there's like 5 or 6 of the children at the time all going through this assessment. And again, I can't remember all the details, but I remember there was probably about 5 to 6 sessions, and then at the end of those sessions they produce a report, and that report gives you the diagnosis of whether your child has autism. So yeah, we had this process that just seemed to take forever. So if you are in that situation, the earlier you can start that process, the better. When we look back at it now, we actually did start this process quite early compared to many other families. In fact, when Sienna was being assessed, some of the children that were there were 2-3 years older than sort of Sienna. If you can get this not sorted, but if you can go down this process before your child starts school, then this will help you get the right support and get everything in place before your child starts school, which means their access to education will be far more successful and they will have what they need to access education in the way that they need it to be happy in the school environment. It will mean you get to choose the right school for your child, and it will mean you get your education healthcare plan in place. That again is another process that once you put an application in for it, it takes minimum 20 weeks. So timelines are what seem like forever. And this really is the start of your battle as a parent of a child with special needs, because you will feel like you are faced with one challenge after another, and you are filling out one form and you are repeating yourself and you are meeting more people, you are having to see more specialists, you're having to wait for appointments, you're having to be on hold with various people, long waiting times, and it will be a constant. And 12 years in now, and we are still going through the same battles, chasing the local authority for funds and support and all the things that you have in your education healthcare plan, making sure those resources are there and that your child has them, because believe me, they are not treated very well. And to put it politely, you are their advocate and you have to fight and fight some more, and you have to keep on to get what you need for your child to be able to access what every other child gets given. So it's a lot more difficult. This process, I think, for me, I had a focus So when you're fighting for something and you know what you're fighting for, and you know your child's got these, these problems that are going to hold them back, this condition that's going to impact them and their education, you've got a purpose, and that you've got to fight for it. But it can feel really overwhelming, and some days you just feel like you haven't got any fight left, and you feel quite deflated and angry. It cost us quite a lot of money because we were trying to fight for support in school. We were trying to fight for a certain school, and we had to get advocates involved. We had to get mediators. We had to get solicitors involved. And this all cost a lot of money, which I know not every family would have that access. And there's so much information out there, yet it's like a mountain to get through it all, and knowing who to ask for help can be really, really hard, and so it feels overwhelming. So what I would say is there is a lot of information out there, but get in touch with somebody, get in touch. There's so many charities, and what I will do is put some links to some really good charities that can help. Reach out if this is you, because I can certainly point you in the right direction. Join forums as well. So there's lots of Facebook parent send groups that you can join, and the moms on there are amazing, and you can ask a question, and there'll be 20 other parents that have gone through what you're going through, and they'll be able to put you in the right direction. And it's also a good sort of support network as well if you are feeling anxious, full of doubt, you don't know what decisions to make, and so on. And if you just want to feel a bit more validated because the people you're friends with, they're what seems like perfect life with their perfect children, are sailing through, and it can be hard to find people that can relate to your situation and the challenges that you're going through. Sometimes you feel like every day you're just fighting a battle, and it's hard to smile and to turn up. So those groups can be really, really helpful to kind of making you feel heard and seen. So my top tips during that time is keep talking to people, whether that is your partner, a parent, somebody else that's going through that challenge, or somebody on a forum. Reach out, keep talking to somebody. Don't keep it all in, because if you keep it all in, then nobody can help you. Do your research, keep reading. Sometimes reading isn't helpful. Maybe look what's online. There's lots of people out there that want to help and want to give you that information. So do your research. Prepare for it to be a long time, and it's a process. But be prepared to fight. It is going to be a battle. And you are sometimes feeling very, very much like you have nothing more to give, but you do. And you're strong, so you need to keep focused. Know the rules, because a lot of these local authorities, they take too long to do things. But there are specific rules, and they're all outlined on the website, how long each of the stages should take. So always be mindful that how long something should take, so that you can keep chasing. It is a long journey to get through to that diagnosis. But there is life after diagnosis. Some of the positive things are that you now have answers. You now have a voice. You now have basically a plan of where you go, because once you've got that diagnosis, you can start to get things in place. You can start to get support for your child, whether they are in nursery, whether they're going to school, whether they're in school. You can start to put things together, and really it's a bit like the start of the journey, because now you've accepted what's happening, and I guess that acceptance can take quite a long time. You might know what's happening, but emotionally accepting that diagnosis is quite difficult. I know that me and my husband, we accepted that diagnosis very differently. We processed it very differently, and we will do an episode on those differences, because I think it's really important about how mothers and fathers experience the same thing but may react differently, display different emotions, but essentially going through the same journey. So accepting what's happening once you've got that diagnosis does become a little bit easier, and you start to put things in place. It took me a while to, if I'm honest, to kind of see a bit of light at the end of the tunnel, because we went through different situations where Sienna started one school, and that was a real battle because she was in a mainstream school with added support. And then we started to realise after the first year of being in that school that it was going to be too much of a challenge for all the sort of stakeholders involved. It was too much for Sienna. The teachers at that school did not cope with somebody like Sienna with her needs, and it became apparent that my child was not wanted in that school because she did not fit the typical mainstream pupil, and she didn't have the type of autism that was accepted at that school. And that is another battle, a big battle that we'll talk about in another episode. But that again was a very challenging time for us because then we had to find a new school. So once you're in that right setting and you know your child is more settled, you can start to get some structure. You can start to understand what autism is, but also understand how autism presents in your child, because autism will present differently in every single child. And that's one of the biggest things that I found getting my head around, because I've been around autistic children, people, and they could talk, or they could do this, or they were fascinated by such and such, but my child wasn't like that. Okay, so just understanding your child and what is different about them, embracing it. And I guess what I learned during this time, and what I kind of would urge anybody else to learn from, is just to focus on your child, not compare to other children, other milestones and what other children are doing, whether that be mainstream neurotypical children or children with special educational needs or disabilities. Just focus on your child and what they do and what milestones they hit and what looks like a normal day and what looks like their typical behaviour. Because the more you start to understand, the more you start to know what will impact your child and how things can trigger them, and you can start to spot the challenging behaviours, and you can start to recognise situations, different environments that might have a negative or a positive impact on your child. And I think that's what I wish I focused more on. And also I focused so much of my energy on finding a cure, like reading this bit of research, this is going to get Sienna talking, or this is this new drug, or this new therapy, or what have you. And I focused a lot on thinking that one day Sienna was going to be cured of this autism. And whilst, one day there may be a miracle drug that stops it, I need to be realistic that there is no cure for autism. It's a part of them. It's something that Sienna has, and it's a condition that will live with her, and we've got to live with it, and we've got to embrace it, and we've got to understand it, and we've got to learn from it. So I wish I didn't focus so much energy and attention to what will fix her, because she's not broken. She's just a bit different to other children, and that's what I wished I had embraced at that time, and just looked at all the achievements that she hit when she hit them. And I did eventually, once I'd stopped worrying about how she was different to the children. So hopefully I've taken you through our journey of our discovery, really, of what autism was and the signs that we noticed, and how we then took those signs and got Sienna diagnosed. Hopefully you can see that there is kind of life after the diagnosis. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to our journey. Although it's been quite difficult to revisit that time, it's an important experience to share. So I want to reassure you, if you are on this journey, that you are not alone. There are other people that have experienced it, that will be experiencing it, and do reach out to get that support that you will need. Every child's journey is unique, so what's happened for me and our family will be different to your journey, but that doesn't mean there aren't people that can help you, that can relate to your story, that can share their experiences. Please do, if you are going through this, connect with me on my Instagram, which is at Diary of an Autism Mum Podcast. Leave comments on the podcast and I will get back to you. But I'd love to hear what your experiences are, and if we here on the podcast can help you. So again, thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.